Chapter 36. My Return to Pahoa and Reminiscing. I stayed a few days, and during that time, I reviewed all that I had seen and heard. I made sure nothing was left out, because this was the most important part of my writing. The day came when I had to leave. I woke up early, and Elena prepared breakfast. Mr. Kupahu came and sat next to me. I told him I had to get back to work because my vacation was longer than I had planned. While we were eating, he said if I promised to come back on my next vacation, maybe he would have another story for me. I thanked him and said that, at that point, I had enough material to write my story. After breakfast, we all walked into the living room and sat down. This would be my last meeting with Elena and Mr. Kupahu. It was hard for me to leave because they both had been so helpful to me at all times. But I had to look ahead. I picked up my suitcase and hugged both of them with tears in my eyes, got in the car, and drove off. I would have 4 hours to think of what had happened and plan for my future. I stopped at the volcano house to have lunch. There were lots of tourists sightseeing at the crater. I sat at a small table, and my eyes wandered out through the window. I could see the white clouds of smoke billowing from the pit. Then I began to remember that one time I had a friend who was once a ranger at the volcano park. We were both in the United States Navy together on the USS Beaver during the First World War. I was a carpenter's mate, 3rd class, and he was a seaman, 1st class. After we were discharged, we both came back and lived in Hawaii. I worked for the U.S. Navy at Pearl Harbor, and he became a ranger at the volcano park. We did not meet again for a long while. Then one day I happened to meet him at the main post office in Honolulu, working as a clerk in the mail room. We were both happy to see each other. I made arrangements to meet at a chop suey restaurant so we could talk all about what had happened through the years. The day came when we had lunch together. He began to tell me what had happened to him since we had last been together. I ate, and at the same time, listened to his sad story. After he left the Navy, he came to work as a ranger. He got married and raised a nice small family. As a ranger, he always came across burial caves. There were some old Hawaiians working at the volcano park, and sometimes they related old stories told to them by their parents. One of these stories was about Hawaiians doing embalming, and the body remained the same as the day the person died. This was their kept secret. When he heard of this story, he became interested. Being part Hawaiian and part Caucasian, instead of finding out more evidence about the secret embalming, he took it upon himself and thought if he took just an arm and brought it to the Board of Health, it probably could find the ingredients in the embalmed arm. The biggest mistake he made was not asking some old folks if they could tell him about the ritual or if a taboo existed. These were the necessary questions he should have asked. Being part Hawaiian, he had heard his grandparents tell him about mutilating a part of the body while it lay buried in a cave. He knew the penalty was severe, or you may live a life of troubles, or your loved ones would pay your penalty. This is what he told me in his exact words. I decided that this belief was past, and we were living in a new era. I did not see anything wrong if I could find out the ingredients. This would be a thing in our modern age. Then I interrupted and asked him, "Would you give this information free if you found the secret?" This was his answer. "I would be a rich man." I asked him if he found the embalmed body. He replied, "It took me a long time before I came to a burial cave. I never told anyone what I was doing. I always hiked along and brought back Petri lava plants for decorations. My boss liked that, but I was more interested in burial caves. One day, just by chance, I happened to move a broken ohia tree. I saw an opening and found out it was a cave. I had a flashlight with me. I walked in and saw it was a burial cave. Then I came upon a flat rock, upon which lay a full, solid body. I touched it with my hand, and it was as hard as a rock. Then I knew I had found an embalmed body, but all I wanted was a piece. I made up my mind to break part of the arm, but had to pound it with a rock to break it off. I closed the burial cave by moving the boulder. Then I moved the ohia tree right over the boulder. I wrapped the arm in my raincoat and put it under the seat of the pickup truck. I hid it in the garage of my house, so when I had my day off, I would take it to Hilo. I was so happy that I got what I was looking for. 1 week later, I took the arm to the Board of Health and showed it to the official. I made up a story that I found the part of the arm and it was embalmed. They were surprised, as this was the first time they had received part of an embalmed arm. The news media got the story, and I was in the middle. I had to make a good story to cover up what I did. I told them I found it at the entrance to a cave, and I was curious. That was the reason I brought it, to see if they could tell me what it was all about. The Board of Health checked and found nothing. All they said was that the flesh hardened like the bone, and there was no way to examine it. I took it back and put it where I found it. I was given a good talking to by my boss. I told him I was sorry and that it wouldn't happen again. I never told the true story. I kept everything to myself. It did not take long before I was getting into all kinds of trouble. I lost my job and family and got into trouble with the law. I did not know what to do. I had only one hope, so I went to see a relative of my mother's. He helped me, and we had a ho'oponopono seance. After it was all done, I again felt like a free man. Then I got a job at the post office. I was so happy. I tried to patch things up. Now I am back with the family. It just shows that too much aggressiveness doesn't pay. I extended my sympathy and wished him luck in his future endeavors. I paid for the lunch and we both walked out. He said to me, "I have kept this in me and did not know who I could relate to. Now I'm relieved. When I met you, that was the answer." We both shook hands and left. A month later, I read in the obituary column that he had passed away. I was so sorry to learn of this and said a prayer for the repose of his soul. I paid for my lunch and began my journey to Pahoa. While driving along, I remembered another well-kept secret of the Makanui clan told to me by my mother. There are 3 secret entrances, or mullet holes, known only by the kahuna, who is the keeper, known as Kahuna Lua Huna, in Kailua, Waimanalo, and Kuli'o'o, near Kuapa Pond. There is an underground lake under the Ko'olau Range where the mullet swim back and forth. After the spawning, there is another secret opening to the ocean only known to the keeper. The secret of the mullet hole entrance was lost when the keeper died. I asked my mother what the entrance to a mullet hole was made of that ordinary people could not find. This is how she explained it. She had never been to anyone because women were barred from being near the entrance. She only knew what her grandparents had told her. Her grandfather came from Oahu and her grandmother from Hawaii. The entrance was made of 2 flat slabs of porous rock. The edges where the two slabs fit together were hewn so well that the two fit so tight it was impossible to notice. You would walk over it and not notice it. This is one of the arts called lua huna, taught to the keeper of the Mullet Hole. The entrance was taboo to all, and the penalty the same as that to those who try to use a Kuula Rock for their own gain. There was no mention made of how the mullet came in during the spawning season and the young mullet leave for the ocean. Mother said her grandfather ate the mullets. During the war, I was working for a laundry company and my route was to the Windward District. In the morning, I passed the Kuapa Pond, and one day I happened to see the Chinese who took care of the pond laying their nets inside the entrance as the mullet were swimming in. They told me that if they didn't do this, the mullet would disappear. Someone told them there was an opening under the pond, but they had not found it. Sometimes lots of mullet in the pond returned to the entrance back to the ocean. It was a mystery to them. This was in the year 1941, and to this day, no one has found the secret entrance to the Mullet Hole. With all these things going through my mind while driving, before I knew it, I was just about home. I began to remember all the landmarks. I just said to myself, did I pass that little town of Ola'a and I didn't even remember? Maybe I saw it as I passed, but my mind was thinking about the Mullet Hole secrets that interested me. In a few minutes, I was home at just about the time I had calculated. My parents were very happy to see me. They asked me if I was hungry, and I said I wasn't, but what I needed was a little rest. I said, I brought a package from Elena and Mr. Kupahu. They give their regards, and also Mr. and Mrs. Johnson of Kalai. Heneli Ku is a very old man. He told me to hug you for him. I'm very thankful to Heneli Ku and Mr. Kupahu. They were very helpful in trying to explain to me the different things so that I would understand the correct interpretation. I also have to thank you for the family code that I spoke to Heneli Ku. It was with this code that I got all the cooperation. I got my story, and that is all I want, and nothing more. Whoever wants to know and tries to practice, I can say, it looks good, but if you fail, the punishment you have to go through is not worth the time and trouble. This is my opinion as I see it. I like the way I am now. Just an ordinary, free person, responsible to no one but myself. My mother listened to what I said and was thankful. She said, I married a Chinese so that my children would be aggressive to better things in life, to know all about our culture and heritage and try to improve a better life from it. This is what my parents wanted from me, an improvement of better understanding with those with whom I associated. These are the things you get in life from your parents. When we grow old, we do the same to our growing children. What my parents were trying to tell me is all you have to do is to ask. When you find the answer, then you are ready to take over. I walked into the bedroom and lay down on the soft bed. In a few seconds, I was fast asleep. When I awoke, it was about 6 o'clock. My father had dinner ready. After dinner, we all walked into the living room and I began telling my long story to my mother. She listened and questioned me as I went along. She was pleased to hear what I had to say. I told her, if Heneli Ku would tell me the remaining 20%, I would be like him. My mother said, you are very wise not to ask him. If you did, you are trying to be greedy, and this alone would show that you want to benefit for yourself. When you have that idea, he no longer will help you, as he knows you would be in trouble sooner or later. I am glad you did not carry this out. I was satisfied with what I had. I told my parents, I will stay here about a week, then leave for Hilo. I will turn over whatever is left of my business to my brother Peter for the love of $1 and then leave for Honolulu to work for the United States Naval Base at Pearl Harbor. The next day, after all the house chores were completed, I sat with my mother so she could listen to what I had to say in every detail, and if I should mislead in my story, she could correct me. This is the story I related to her. I think I was 12 years old and understood right from wrong, and that Sunday was a day of obligation. That day I must attend church service. My mother called me one morning and said I was going with her to attend a family funeral and that I must dress in my Sunday suit. Being the oldest, I must accompany my mother, whatever the occasion. I asked her where the funeral was to be held. She told me it was to be at Kaimu, the famous black sand beach. It was about a mile from home. The only transportation was to ride a donkey, but she told me we would walk. While she was dressing, I put on my brown woolen suit. I did not wear any shoes. Mother wore a black holoku dress with a long train that was tied to her left wrist so it wouldn't drag on the ground. She wore a big black straw hat with a wide brim and a long black hairpin to hold the hat on her head. She carried a small black purse on her right arm and tucked a black handkerchief in her sleeve. We both started walking. There was hardly anybody out at that time of day. All we saw were donkeys grazing around the place. I did not say too much. Once in a while, my mother would tell me to hurry up because I was walking too slow for her. I began to run to catch up to her, and sometimes I would run ahead of her, then would walk slow so she could catch up to me. We met a few fishermen going home with their catch in their fish bags. Of course, they always talked to my mother. They wanted to know where she was going. She told them we were going to a family funeral. They were surprised to know that anyone had died. Usually in a small town, the news would travel, but this funeral was one of a little girl who had died a year before. They embalmed her and kept her body in her bed for 1 year. That day was the day that the body would be carried and put in the family burial cave. As we neared the place, I could hear melodious voices crying. When we arrived, I looked at the surroundings and noticed a 2-story building with 2 front open verandas. The building was about 50 yards from the road, and a large breadfruit tree was growing on the side, full of fruit. About 20 yards in front of the house was a large mango tree with lots of green mangoes. A large pandanus mat was laid under the tree so the family could rest and talk to each other. The yard was enclosed with a stone wall with a big wooden gate at the road entrance. The gate was open when we arrived. My mother walked straight to the family of the deceased, with me holding on to her dress. As she hugged them, they all began to cry. This was the melodious tune that I heard when we arrived. They cried for at least 5 minutes, and the sounds began to stop gradually. They wiped their tears, and my mother introduced me to the mother of the deceased girl. I think it was about lunch hour, because they had charcoal broiled fish and poi with all the trimmings placed on tea leaves laid on the pandanus mat. All gathered around and sat down. I had a small bowl of poi and a plate of broiled fish. It was delicious. After lunch, I just stayed with my mother. I believe about 3 o'clock, all the family were getting ready to go and see the little girl. I walked alongside my mother, holding her hand. The body was on the 2nd floor, in the back room. As we approached near the bed, my mother bent down and kissed the little girl's forehead. I just stood there and looked. She was dressed in a white dress, and her hair was braided so each braid lay on her shoulders. The braids were tied with white ribbon. She wore white shoes and stockings and had a quilt blanket on her bed, the family heirloom called laulehua. The color of the quilt blanket was white, with the design laulehua in red. She lay on the bed with both eyes closed and her hands crossed on her breast. After the family had seen her, she was placed in a small dugout wooden koa canoe that just fit her snugly. 2 men on each side carried her to the burial cave. It was a long walk. The road was an old rocky trail. When we approached the burial cave, there were all kinds of trees surrounding the place. The ground was covered with volcano rock called A'a. I did not see any entrance. The 4 men who carried the wooden koa canoe each had a thick wooden stick with the handle round and the other end tapered. They were made of kawila wood. This wood was called the Hawaiian ironwood. They used these hard sticks to clear the lava rock away at the entrance. As the lava rock was cleared, there was a flat, solid, porous rock covering the entrance. It was made of 2 pieces. When joined together, looked like one solid piece. This was one of their luahuna secrets. I saw them removing the 2 pieces of rock from the entrance with just the kawila wood with ease. When that was done, the men started walking down solid steps into the burial cave. We waited for about half an hour, and the men came back to take the canoe with the body of the little girl into the cave. I asked my mother the reason for the delay, and she told me they had to light all the kukui lamps and spray the water with the tea leaves. I asked why they did that. She told me there were a few crevices in the cave where the water settled. They dipped the tea leaves in these crevices and scooped the water out and shook them. This sprayed the air to clear it to give more light. My mother began to walk into the cave, and I just followed by holding onto her dress. As we entered into the cave, at the door of the entrance, there were 2 big 6-foot embalmed guards dressed in feather mallows and short shoulder cloaks. One held a spear in the left hand and the other in the right hand. It looked eerie to me, and I stayed close to my mother. The burial cave was like a huge underground chamber. They lay the canoe that housed the little girl to rest on high ground. I saw a few wooden canoes lying farther in. As we came into the cave, on the side near the wall was a flat rock, 5 feet high, 10 feet long, and about 4 feet wide. It was like a table. On this flat rock, I saw about 10 gallon-sized crocks made of clay. On the slab, I saw 4 golden objects, like money. I could see that the gold coins had 5 sharp corners. There were a few silver ones the size of $1. There also were 2 wooden chests with metal straps and locks. Also, I saw colored rocks lying near the crocks. While everybody was watching the ceremony of the little girl, I paid more attention to what was inside of the crocks. This cave was like a storehouse for the old whalers who left their wares and forgot to return. When the ceremony was over, it was getting dark, but the moon was out and bright. Walking home, we had a few accompany us back to Kalapana. After supper, I was too tired to talk, so I went to sleep. The next day, I asked my mother what I had seen. She told me that what I had seen belonged to the whalers. Those that came back, the keeper of the cave gave them their things back. What I saw in the cave had been forgotten. I asked about the gold coins with 5 corners. She told me the value was $50, and the silver dollars were the Hawaiian dollar. She also told me that whatever was left in the cave, no Hawaiian would want to take and use. It was taboo and bad luck. These belonged to the dead. After I told my story, I then asked what had happened to that burial cave. She told me it was still there, but I could not find it. I told her I thought I could remember enough of that experience 18 years before to find the same cave. Mother said, "Tomorrow, you take me and prove to me where that burial cave is. If you can find that cave, you go and take what you need. If you cannot find it, then you will believe all that I have told you." This Luahuna's secret is one of the best kept secrets. This is the art of camouflaging. You see once and only once, not twice. The next day, I took my mother to go to the same place where we were at the funeral of the little girl. I thought it would be easy for me to find it. My mother laughed at me and said, "You will see, and you will believe what I said." When we arrived at the place, the house was run down and nobody was living there. I retraced our walk, and my mother followed. As I walked, I tried to remember not to go away from the trail. At last, we came to the clearing. I looked around and noticed the tree where I had stopped the day of the funeral to urinate. Of course, the tree was much bigger. I told Mother, "You remember this tree when I told you to wait. I went in back of the tree and then came back to you. You were watching me." She told me, "You have a good memory." Then I said, "Now we will see what happens from now on. You see the open space with lots of lava rock? That's the place. Now all I have to do is to push the rock aside and find the stone slab, and that is the entrance to the cave." "Are you sure of that?" my mother retorted to me. I said, "Yes, Mama." She laughed. I sensed something was wrong, and she must know about this. I walked right into the center and started digging the lava away to find the rock slab. There was no rock slab. I dug more than a foot deep. It couldn't be. When they cleared the lava, it was only 4 inches deep. I dug more, and there was still lava rock. My mother asked me, "Do you believe me now?" I had to admit it was true. This was one of the secrets called Luahuna, practiced by the Hawaiians, that was so well guarded that what you saw before you, the very next day, was not there. My mother said, "I brought you with me to see if you're going to take what you saw. But to my surprise, you only want to write and tell exactly what you saw and not try to find out the secret." I said, "This is what I want, and I thank you ever so much." Before going home, we made one visit to see the site of the old store where my story began. It was where the Catholic Church now stands, called Star of the Sea. I knew the priest who painted the pictures inside the church. My mother met a few of the relatives at Kapa'ahu. Then we came home to Pahoa. We were sitting at home resting when I remembered another story. When I was 13 years old and attending Pahoa school and living with my father's Chinese friend, the tailor Ahina, I always had an urge to see for myself what I heard or heard someone tell me. This one incident occurred when I used to go to bed at night at Ahina's and always heard the jingle of money, like someone was counting or playing with it. One Saturday morning, Ahina said he was going to Hilo to do some business, and he would be back in the late afternoon. That day, the weather was wet and the sky looked gloomy. I had to stay indoors because I had sewing to do. He left at 8 o'clock in the morning by stagecoach. The trip to Hilo was about 20 miles. After he left, I was all alone. I started my sewing. I was about to finish my first pair of pants when a man came in the store to pay his bill. He handed me a $5 gold piece, and I gave him change of $1. I looked at the gold piece for some time, then placed it in the cash register drawer and locked it. I returned to my sewing machine and sat on the chair. Then the thought came to me to see the tailor's room, but I had to finish my sewing before I did this. I started toward the room, and as I turned the knob, it was open. I went in, and all I saw was one steel bed with a mosquito net hanging from the ceiling and resting on the head of the bed. The mattress was covered with a quilt blanket and one pillow. There was one footlocker and a 4-drawer cabinet and a small footmat near the bed. I sat on the bed, and then I heard the same sound that I heard every night when Ahina slept on his bed. I stood up and pulled up the mattress and saw the gold money lying on the straw mattress next to the spring. The whole mattress was covered with from $2.50 gold pieces to a double eagle that was a $20 piece. This was the first time I had ever seen lots of gold money in one place. I spotted a $5 piece and picked it up. I said to myself, he would not miss this. I fixed his bed nicely and left the room. I went back to my sewing machine and sat in the chair. Then I said to myself, people are funny, now that I can say what I see. No wonder he is so happy, because of all that gold he has. The rain stopped. I stood up and walked out of the store and ran just across the street to a small candy store. I bought 50 cents worth of mint candy and returned to the store. I kept the change and ate my candy while I was sewing. I was satisfied that all this relieved me of my imagination. When I went home during the school vacation, I told my father all about the incident of the gold money. This is what my father told me. Most of the Chinese believe if they sleep at night with the gold underneath their mattress, that no evil will harm them. No wonder Ahina always reminded me when I turned over the gold piece that I received from a customer to him. See this gold money? It will always protect you. I never paid any attention to what he was saying until my father told me. It was a happy day for me to reminisce with my mother, and maybe this would be the last time I would have the chance. As for my father, we talked about what I was going to do. Someday I will write a true story about their two worlds finding love and happiness in the small town of Pahoa, Hawaii. This is only a dream of what I have in mind at this time. During the last week, I spent most of my time home with my parents. I will always remember that time during the rest of my life. I knew when I left them I might not come back, as I did not know what the future held for me. The day came for me to leave. It was a sad day. I kissed and hugged them both, then drove off to Hilo. I met my brother, Peter, and made out a receipt for the value of $1 and love, and signed my name. The business was called the Royal Film Corporation. I stayed one day in Hilo, then left for Honolulu. I went to work for the United States Civil Service at the U.S. Naval Air Station, Pearl Harbor, for 6 years. In 1949, I left for Okinawa and worked for the Okinawa Engineers Depot for the Army for 7 years. Then returned to Honolulu and worked for the State of Hawaii Civil Service, Department of Defense, for 13 years. And in 1969 with the Department of Education, retiring on December 29, 1972. On January 1st, 1973, I began to collect all my notes from 1910 to 1972, putting them together, and set this book into motion. Now my story is finished for my children to read. It is my fondest wish that you who have shared this book with me have enjoyed it as much as I have enjoyed writing it. Aloha pumehana. Joseph Keonona, Chun Fat. This has been The Mystery of the Kuula Rock, a true-to-life novel based on the life and legends of the people living in Kalapana, Hawaii and the surrounding area, and the unraveling of the mystery of the Kuula Rock. Copyright 1975 by Joseph Keonona, Chun Fat. Read for you by John Kekoa Lake. Production copyright 2018. Mahalo.